All right, it's so good to be talking again with Carlos Whittaker. Carlos, your 7 weeks of screen-free time are
Yes.
complete, and you're back
They're
to the
complete.
screens.
I'm full on back to the screens, which people are like, well, wait a second, what happened? Listen, I never said I wasn't coming back, but a lot of things did change. So it was an amazing 2 months.
So your book, I'm looking at a photo of you in a nice straw hat. It looks like it was disconnected with a cross out. It's reconnected. How 7 screen-free weeks with monks and Amish farmers helped me recover the lost art of being human. We last spoke on this podcast for your last book.
Yes. How to Human.
How to Human. And now you spend some time on how to recover the art of being human.
Yes.
Talk to me about how this whole experiment came about. This idea that like Carlos Whittaker, Instagram maven, connected to the whole world, is going to go cold turkey.
Yeah, it started when I was actually writing How to Human. And as I was writing it, it was a Sunday afternoon or morning, I can't remember, but we all know the notifications that slide across our screen on Sunday that say, you have averaged this much time a day on your phone. And normally I literally don't even look at it, or I just roll my eyes at myself and I swipe it away. I'm like, well, this is my job. This is my job. This is what I do for a living. I've got CPA friends that stare at their laptops all day. Why can't I stare at my phone?
Exactly, right? Like, oh, I spend 8 hours on my screen. Well, that's my job, 8 hours a day.
Exactly. And then so I did start thinking, well, how much of my actual job am I doing on my phone? Like when it comes to really my job versus, scrolling or just kind of numbing. So then I did the math, and the math was scarier. And I actually think that Apple and Google, Android, and they need to change the notification, because the notification only tells me what I average in a week. If the notification were to tell me what I average in a year, suddenly it's heavier, right? So I did the math. That's 49 hours a week. That's 2 entire cycles of the sun that I'm spending looking at my screen. Well, that was a little terrifying. Then the math keeps going to 3 months a year. So 3 months of my life, I'm looking at my phone. And if I live to be 85 years old, I'll spend over 10 years, a whole decade of my life looking at it. So if the notification came across and said, you will average 10 years of your life, you will lose a decade of your life if you continue at this pace. That's what was shocking when I did the math. So that's what accelerated me to make a pretty drastic decision. Because listen, I love my job. I love creating content. I love all of the things that the phone brings. I love raising money for people, all these amazing things. But I also didn't want to lose a decade of my life. So I said, okay, just Carlos being Carlos, let me go all in, figure out what's an experiment I can do. And I happened to be in a season where I had the availability to not look at a single iPhone, Apple Watch, laptop, TV, not a single screen for 7 weeks, live with Amish farmers, live with Benedictine monks, get my brain scanned by a neuroscientist before and after, and then write a memoir on it. And so that's what happened.
How did you choose monks and Amish farmers?
Yes. So, I definitely wanted to go to a place that I felt like screens weren't going to be a problem, like, where I wasn't going to have to dodge them constantly. And so my wife, her father, was like a high-level volunteer at this abbey in the high desert of Southern California. So when my wife was a little girl, like 5 or 6 years old, she used to go up to this abbey called Valyermo St. Andrew's Abbey for, days at a time. And she would just be running around, and all the monks loved her. So she called the former abbot, who still was, because when you take a vow of monastic vow, you're there until you die. And so she calls Abbot Francis and explains herself. Hey, Bill was my father. And he's like, oh, Heather, I remember you, the little girl. And so they catch up.
Not many kids at the Abbey.
Not many kids running around at the Abbey, right? So she just says, hey, my husband wants to do this thing. Can he stay there for, at that point, I think we just said like 4 or 5 days. And he said, well, have him come for a few weeks. And then so that was kind of very relational, how I ended up at the Abbey, where all these monks knew my wife when she was a little girl. So that was really cool. And then the Amish, I have a friend named Leanne Miller, who married an Amish man. He left the Amish for her crazy Amish love scandal story. But he is still close with his Amish family. So he contacted his family because I was like, well, I kind of do want to live with the Amish. That was one thing that I did want to do. And so all of his family rejected me. And then they asked a couple other Amish families. They all rejected me. And I was like, well, I guess I'm not going to get to live with the Amish. But the one last family they reached out to was a sheep farming family named the Millers. And they were like, absolutely, have him come. So I dove headfirst, became best friends with Willis, the Amish sheep farmer, and learned to sheep farm and all the things. And so anyway, that's kind of how it happened, how I ended up with them. But I did 2 weeks with the monks, 2 weeks with the Amish, and then 3 weeks with my family back in Nashville, because I was like, well, anyone can be screen-free with monks and Amish. Can I do this in my city with my friends in my life? And so that was how the 7 weeks happened.
So, you write about how the experiment with the monks almost ends like the next day. You wake up and you're like, I can't do this. Talk to me about how painful was that first 24 hours? And then how do we bring you back? How do you bring yourself back from the edge?
Oh my gosh. The edge, I was over the edge. I was like free falling, like falling off the edge. Here's the thing. And I think this experiment would have been different had I gone to the Amish first and then the monks. But the fact that I went from 7.5 hours a day on my phone to 23 hours a day of silence. So not only did I not have screens, but there was just no talking. Breakfast was
a drastic move.
It was drastic. And so, listen, friend, when you can't get out of your own head, like we can get out of our own head. Like if we start worrying about something, we pick up the phone and we start scrolling TikTok or whatever.
Yeah, it's like a painkiller.
Yeah, it literally is. And I guess I didn't realize how much of an ibuprofen my phone was, because my thoughts just kept going and spiraling, and then worry took over, and then identity crisis happening all within 24 hours. And so I woke up the next morning and I was like, okay, deuces. Like I can't do this. Okay, I've spent 24 hours in a monastery. I'll write a book about that. Like that's it. I'm done. I call my wife from the monastery phone, like the bat phone, right? Like, so I call her the next day and I was like, hey babe, like I packed my bags, book me a ticket, have somebody pick me up, I'm out. And she's like, no, you're actually not. Like we prepared too long, and we did a lot of preparation for you to just do this, like
she's like, I was also needing a vacation from you. You can't come home.
Totally. And she just is like, I just don't think you want to do that. Like, I think you can do this. And so, it ended up being about 3 days of that. Like I'm talking about heart palpitations. Like I was having physical manifestations of anxiety, night sweats, tight chest, like all of these things, because I was coming off, I was legitimately detoxing. I thought I was detoxing from my phone, but I think now, and talking to my neuroscientist, buddy now, and I think I was actually coming off of the drug of control, the drug of knowledge, this drug, this thing that we're addicted to is actually making us feel like we're in more control than we actually are. And when we lose that, that's when the panic starts to come in. And so I think that was the first 3 days of just terror. But then day 4 was like an elephant stepped off my chest, and I got it, right? And so the first 3 days I think was an experiment about a phone. The following 6.5 weeks was an experiment about relationships and all of these beautiful things that I'd forgotten about.
It's fascinating. So it's 72 hours to basically wean yourself from the addiction. Is there a trick to that? Is that to that time period, or do you think that's unique to you?
I think that may be unique to me. I know that from the research I did after I got home, that a lot of people do have physical, symptoms of anxiety when they're deconnected. Like even when your phone's not in your pocket, some people, their heart rate begins to increase. So I know that those things happen. I think 3 weeks for me, 3 days for me was just kind of my thing. But I've talked to people who've had, longer that have done what I did, and it took them 5 days to really calm down. Some people, it's not a problem. For me, it definitely was.
So you get through that period of time, and I'm curious, you go through 7 weeks here.
Yeah.
What is the thing you ended up missing the most? And what is the thing you were most worried about that ended up not mattering? You're like that.
Oh, that's a great question. So, I think by day 5 and I wasn't, what I was missing was my friends and my family. I mean, I'll just be honest with you. Like, that's what I was missing. I was missing being with them because I was gone for a month from them. But I really wasn't missing anything else. Like, I thought I would miss No, I'd walk out at the monastery. It's in the high desert of Southern California. I was like, man, it's hot. I'd reach in my phone to see how hot it was. And I realized, oh, I guess I'll just never know. I guess I just know that it's hot. It's just hot. And so suddenly, like, I didn't know so much.
Do they get like print newspapers there or no newspapers?
Well, no. Here's the kicker: is the monks all have phones, so I could have asked them, "Hey, how hot it is." So, like, once in a while, I'd get information from them. If something happened in the world I needed to know about, I'd hear it at lunch because the monks were able to talk at lunch. But me, for instance, I was without any information, right? And so, yeah, so, I think it was very freeing. I thought I would miss not knowing things, not knowing the news, not knowing, I think I miss, like, how's my soccer team doing? A couple things like that. But most of it was pretty freeing. And so, so I didn't miss anything but my friends and my family. What was the second question you asked me?
The second question was, going into it, did you anticipate something you were really worried about? Or you're like, oh my God, how am I going to live without X for 7 weeks? And after 7 weeks, you're like, oh, I didn't need that at all.
Yes. I think what I was going to miss was, again, this goes back to knowing. There's a big chunk of the book is talking about, just our souls and our psyche were not created with the capacity to consume the amount of content we consume. And so I think I thought I was going to miss just knowing everything every day. Like, I love the news. I love to know everything. And I didn't. I didn't miss that. I think I was worried about, losing my Insta Familia. Like, well, if I'm not there, they're just going to all hit unfollow, and like, I'm going to show back up.
Go to another Instagram account, and you'll come back to nobody.
Because here's the deal, like, there's more than enough people creating content for anybody to disappear, and everyone to just go, yeah, oh, I love you. Oh, wait. Carlos has been gone for a little bit. I don't even I didn't even realize it. When I showed back up on Instagram, people were like, oh, you were gone. It's like people didn't even know. Here, I thought it was the most important thing in their lives. And so there were all of these realizations about my identity and all of these things that I think got pretty self-corrected pretty quickly. So yeah, I didn't miss what I thought I was going to miss. So
you have a chapter you write about Godspeed.
Yeah.
And you say that we were designed to move 3 miles an hour.
Yeah.
What tell me about that revelation that humans are meant to move 3 miles per hour, and what that means in the modern age, and what this whole experience taught you about that.
Yeah. So, I call it Godspeed, only because, I feel like humans, if you look at how fast a human walks, it's 3 miles an hour. So some people walk maybe 3.5 miles an hour. Some people a little slower, but it depends on the length of your femur, I guess. But we're just pretty much designed to move at that speed. And from the dawn of humanity up until like 100 or so years ago, that's how fast we all moved. And I just feel like that when I was with the monks and I'm watching them walk everywhere, and I didn't have a vehicle, so I had to walk everywhere. I noticed things that I never would have noticed if I was moving at the speed of light that we, move at all the time. And so, I think that it gave me a lot of breath. It gave me a reason to maybe kind of figure out how can I slow down in my normal everyday life. And I have done so much slowing down, even at the speed of being an author and there's a documentary coming out, and I got a book coming out, and I got all these things I got to do. I have made my life so slow, so that Godspeed. I just think that.
What's an example of that? What's a practical example of how you've made your life slow?
Okay, great question. I have, and again, I'm talking even the speed of information that we're consuming. So let me just tell you about my mornings. Okay, so this is what a morning looks like for me, comparatively speaking to what it used to look like. I no longer use my phone as my alarm clock. So my phone gets plugged in the kitchen, and I went to Target and bought this really cool thing called an alarm clock.
I remember
and
those.
Plugged it in. I remember 1997. It was the craziest thing. Plugged it in next to my bed. All it does in the morning is wake me up. I don't pick it up and start touching its screen, and it doesn't make me angry with notification. It just wakes me up. And then I have 30 minutes that I do not look at my phone. So I wake up, and here's the kicker. I have my cup of coffee. And guess what? All I do is have my cup of coffee. There's a whole chapter about savoring, something that we've forgotten.
No newspaper, no TV screen, no phone.
Well, no. So here we go. I'm glad you said that. I have my coffee. I drink my first cup of coffee, savor it. Second cup of coffee, I walk into my front yard, and sitting in my front yard for the last 2 years since I've done this experiment, I still don't know who throws it there. is wrapped in plastic, a newspaper, like an actual paper, the Tennessean. And I pick up the newspaper and I read the news. And, you know, like I'll get on, barely do I get on X anymore, but like that's where I'm consuming my news. Why did I decide to do that? Because I was consuming it 24/7. And now if something happens on planet Earth and I'm scrolling through Instagram, either you're going to tell me or another one of my friends is going to tell me, and then I'll find out about it, as opposed to just reading it 24/7. So I consume my news from a newspaper. Even when I travel now, I grab a newspaper at the airport. I feel like it's 1988 and I'm like my dad walking through the newspaper or walking through the airport. And, so I'm consuming from my newspaper.
Yeah, I've noticed recently at Hudson they have like 3 copies of the newspaper.
Yeah.
One is being sold for you.
Yeah, it's for me. And so, you know, and then finally after 30 minutes or an hour, you know, that's when I'll start working again on my phone and creating my videos in the morning and all the things. But, you know, I've just made a decision to slow. Another thing I've done that has slowed me down is, and this may be radical for some people, but when I was with the Amish and Farmer Willis was like, hey, I need you to go to the feed store to pick up this part for my tractor. So he'd send me on his e-bike and he would tell me how to get to the feed store. And I'd have to remember how to get to the feed store because I didn't have Siri telling me where to turn. So I'd get lost on the way. I would see people I'd never thought would have seen. I'm asking Amish strangers, hey, do you know how to get to the feed store? Oh yeah, you're two roads back. You need to take another left. And suddenly my brain was awakened. I feel like we were created to get lost and find our way, and we no longer get lost and find our way. So now it's been a year now since I've done this. I no longer use Apple Maps or Google Maps to get anywhere. I look it up before I leave. I write it on a napkin or a piece of paper, just like it's 1985 again.
Make a right at the McDonald's.
Make a right at the McDonald's, turn left. And so I'm just trying to slow down to get everything back to Godspeed, only because, you know, things are getting faster. We've got AI, we've got all kinds of things that I'm not against. You know, I love pickleball, and there's a new AI app called Swing Vision that I hook my phone up to the fence behind me, and it tracks all of my shots, tells me how fast my shots are going. If it's a backhand, if it's in or out, it'll tell me on my Apple Watch. I love it. So like, I'm still a fan of screens, of AI, of phones, but I'm just making sure that I'm slowing down enough because all these things are doing are speeding us up.
One of the things you write about in the book is the importance of solitude.
Yeah.
You make some suggestions about that. Yeah. You were with monks. You learned a lot about solitude. You probably, like, you know, globally, you've probably spent more time by yourself in quiet time than several billion people on Earth.
Yeah, totally.
Just by doing it for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Talk to me about solitude, the importance of solitude, and what we lose as humans by not having any time to ourselves anymore.
Yeah. You know, we are the first generations legitimately to have lost the ability to have solitude. We just, because we've got these devices in our hands, we no longer have access to solitude. Even when, you know, 100 years ago, when somebody would have been alone in true solitude, we no longer have to be alone. Like we've got, you know, however many people we want to talk to on our phones, we're doing all these things. And so what happened to me those first few days of solitude, I think my body was recovering from the lack of solitude in my life. And this is the beautiful thing about solitude. I honestly believe that the slower we go, the quieter we can get. And I'm not saying you have to go to a monastery. Do it for 30 minutes. Just start with 30 minutes. Put your phone somewhere, go on a walk, don't listen to a podcast, just be alone, truly alone. And I promise, this is what I think, why I think it's important. I had more incredible ideas for the next decade of my life and my career and all these things. I think I had them because I was alone and it was silent, and my brain was actually able to do things that it wasn't able to do before. We have so much access to noise. We have so much access. I mean, I like to say it this way: when you lower the volume of life, the volume of God goes up. Whatever God means in your life, when you lower the volume in of all of the input that's coming in, I think the volume of your spirit, the volume of what it is you should be listening to, begins to explode. And so, I'm a big believer in solitude. I still do this now 24 hours a week. So my phone goes away. I don't even look at it for 24 hours and I get some really good solitude.
Wait, so with the thing you're describing, many Jews would tell you that's the Sabbath.
That's the Sabbath. Yeah. Here's the thing to my friends that are Jews, they've been doing this forever. Yeah. And because it's important. Even on
the seventh day, God rested. And so you have, there's a lot of Jews, more religious Jews who will no electronics, no electricity, no phones.
I was in Jerusalem probably 5 years ago, and I'll never forget going back to my hotel, and it was Saturday. I was on the 7th floor, and I got on an elevator, and I clicked the 7th floor button, and it wouldn't go. Yeah. And I was like, what's happening? And then someone's like, oh no, like they walk up on Saturdays. And I was like, oh, because they legitimately are taking this thing seriously. And this is why I love what you said when you said that is because this has been important way before screens. This has been important way before we had all of this content that's coming. I think there's a practice in this that every single person can begin to enjoy solitude. And solitude is going to be more than just your phone. Solitude is going to be something that I think heals your life and begins to heal your family's life as well.
Yeah. So does the whole family engage in this, Carlos, or is this you solo?
When I got back from my 4 weeks away, when I started my 3 weeks with my family, there was no rules on. I didn't tell them, hey guys, no screens, dad's home, we're not going to look at anything. No, they still watch Netflix. They still were on their phones.
So you had to cover your eyes.
I would walk out of the room. They turn on the TV. I'd go to the front porch, But this is what's cool is during those 3 weeks, my family's screen time got cut in half and I didn't ask them to do anything. Now, why is that? Well, because my kids are like, well, when we're talking to you and you don't have a phone in your hand, I just felt bad with the phone in my hand. I didn't want to keep looking down. So there was actually something that changed in their behavior because my behavior changed. So I didn't set up one rule and my family screen time got cut in half because I was the one laying, kind of the runway to kind of how we were going to act and, behave on each other for those 3 weeks. Our meal times got longer. Our conversations got longer. So suddenly, because of all the things I learned when I was with the monks and the Amish, I tell people this all the time with the book. This book isn't about how bad phones are. Like the book isn't about how bad screens are. The book is about how beautiful it is on the other side of the screen. And when you fall back in love with all of the things, I list like 23 things in the book, every chapter. When you fall back in love with those things on the other side of the screen, you're just going to pick up your screen less. You just do it less because you're so in love with all the things that you remember and you're reconnected with on the other side.
Yeah, I was going to say, we wouldn't know each other if it wasn't for the screen.
Exactly.
There's a lot of positive to social media. There's a lot of there's a good, there's a bad, and there's an ugly. Yes. And I guess what you're describing is there is a balance. You don't actually need you went cold turkey for the purposes of this book, but ultimately there is a balance to be found there.
Absolutely. I'm on my phone 3.5 hours a day. So I've gone from 7.5 hours to 3.5 hours.
You're only losing 5 years of your life now instead of a decade.
Guess what? Right? Yeah, I need to launch an e-course. How to gain 5 years of your life back, right? Like all I did was cut it down. I'm doing the same amount of work. I'm right now on Riverside with you recording this. I'm still, sharing my inspirational messages on Instagram. I'm still raising money for strangers. All kinds of cool things are still happening on my phone, but I'm now just on it less because I'm so addicted to just the old school way of living, and I'm trying to implement those things every single day.
One observation you make in the book, and I didn't think about this, and I actually found it to be pretty profound, is that we've lost the ability not to know something.
Yes.
We take for granted that, and you're describing your experience in the book, like, oh my God, I need to know this. I want to Google that. I want to know why this is. And we now live in a world, and it's only existed for a couple decades now. We're both old enough to know the previous world.
Yes.
When you had to go to the library or ask somebody for something. But now, like any question you have, you can Google it, and then suddenly we're an expert. Well, let me tell you what that's all about. Like I've been reading about that for an hour.
And we're a TikTok expert because we listen to 3 podcast episodes and suddenly we know all the geopolitical issues of our time.
That's it. Like, let me tell you about what I think about Bangladesh right now. And so, tell me about that realization. Tell me about the importance of not knowing something.
Yes. Oh my gosh. This probably, when you asked me that, I got super excited because I think this is becoming one of my favorite takeaways of my time. because I said earlier, I'd walk outside, I'm like, man, it's hot. And I'd reach to find out how hot it was. And I realized I don't need to know how hot it is. I just know it's hot, right? Like, why do I need to know it's 97 degrees with a field temperature? I don't. And when I was like with the monks and I had questions and they weren't able to talk to me because it was in grand silence, I couldn't Google it. I just had to wonder. And we have lost the ability to actually even wonder. So think about this for a second. Wondering isn't asking the question, right? So when people say, oh, I wonder what happened in 1985 at the Billy whatever concert, well, we can Google it. Asking the question that starts with I wonder what isn't wondering. Wondering is what happens after you ask the question. So you're right. Wondering is gone, right? You ask a question, you say, I wonder, you Google it, it's over. I'm starting to build a talk for like corporate America because I'm wondering if like, because we can get access to so many answers so quickly, are we actually losing incredible ideas that would normally happen in the wondering? Because wondering was something that happened all the time. Like, are we losing these ideas, these creative ideas, answers that maybe wouldn't be the thing that AI or Google gives us because we've lost wondering? And so I've legitimately become in my friend group, if anyone says, I wonder, I pipe in and I'm like, keep your phones in your pocket. We're just going to wonder.
I mean, my immediate thought goes to things broken around the house, right?
Yes.
Or something comes and you're like, oh, I wonder how to put this together. Yeah. There is something important part of your brain that gets worked when you're like, let me figure this out. Here are three parts. Does this fit into this? Does this fit into this? As opposed to watching that 2-minute YouTube video.
Yes. No, that's so good. I'm so passionate about this point exactly in the book because we've lost, I literally think that we're probably like killing parts of our brain by not wondering. I mean, there has to be, again, I don't know if there's a wondering study out there, but we are, I think, losing the ability to figure things out on our own, right? Like Yelp, I think Yelp has probably been the worst thing to happen to many of our taste buds. We're now trusting a guy named Bob that went to a restaurant and gave it a 2-star review to like help us decide whether or not we're going to go to this restaurant that maybe looks good to us. Like, why don't we wonder and go and figure it out and find out for ourselves?
And then you meet the owner and you turn out to have an incredible conversation with that owner. And you let that one review, dissuade you from that place.
Absolutely. So like wondering is a lost art. It's a lost art form. I tell us a quick story in the book of, I grew up in the 90s. And so like when I went to like a record store,
Mariah Carey. Yes.
Mariah Carey. And I saw the Mariah Carey, like on the cover of her CD. I just remember being like, who is this? She's beautiful. And I picked up the CD player and I listened to it and I was like, oh, her voice is amazing. And nobody knew who she was. I went to the front desk and they're like, oh, I don't know. We just got the CD. And I had to listen to her music for a month and wonder who she was before I finally saw an MTV interview where I saw it and I learned a little bit more about her. And so I just think that those things are uniquely human. Yeah. And we have uniquely ripped that away from our ethos and kind of who we are. So add some more wonder in your life. Don't know everything. That the 3 words in the English language I think need to be more prevalent that aren't right now are the 3 words, I don't know. It's okay.
So talk to me about that practically now. Apply that because we all live with smartphones and Google. Yeah. How do I add wonder to my life, Carlos?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, don't find out the answer to questions that you're thinking. Don't use Google. Like, just kind of stop. And I know that's hard for a lot of people to do because we have such great access. But something else that I've done is I've decided to become a rookie at something every year. So now what I do is I'm like, okay, this year I'm going to learn to do something else. So last year I did magic. So I like learned to become a magician. And so I got a couple magic tricks off the internet and I learned, and I had to like wonder about this. I learned how to become a fly fisherman, and I had to wonder, like, what are things that you can challenge yourself at that is going to take you a long time to master. And so I think that is something we can do. We have a hard time doing things we're not good at. And so,
no one likes failure.
No one likes failure. And so like what are ways that you can challenge yourself to keep learning? Don't let, if you're in a group of friends and someone says, I wonder, if you hear that, and you'll hear it now every single day, you'll hear someone say, I wonder, stop them from Googling it and say, well, let's for 10 minutes, just wonder. We can find the answer out if we need it, but for 10 minutes, let's wonder and see where the conversation goes.
By the way, speaking of fly fishing, many people brought it up. My wife and I went out to fly fish for the first time We tried to look in Montana.
Come on.
Last month.
No, hold on. I feel like I was there when you were there because people were DMing me saying, wait, are you going to run across him? Like, did you actually go to Yellowstone?
No, we went north. We went to Glacier.
Okay.
So we were in Whitefish.
Oh, yes, that's where I was because I spoke at a church in Whitefish.
Oh.
And people saw that you were there.
I was fly fishing in Whitefish.
That's amazing.
And let me tell you something. I could have used your advice, but I was an abject failure at fly fishing. Like, exactly. I am lucky I did not hook myself. I was wearing a jacket. Like, at some point, I'm like, oh, thank God I was covered up there. That would have left a mark.
And so here's the thing. What I love about that is you left with failure. And you get to wonder, well, what could I have done different?
Yeah.
Like how can I be better the next time? What can I do? So like failure actually can lead to wondering, and let that be okay. Something that I started doing before this book is I have a failure journal. Okay. So, and every single week in the journal, I have to write something down that I failed at. And so like, I'm constantly looking for things to fail at. Like if I'm just succeeding in everything, I'm probably doing the wrong thing. I want to keep challenging myself. Failure leads to wondering.
How did you get comfortable with that though? Because it's not a nice feeling, Carlos.
It's not a nice feeling, but you know what the nice feeling is after you fail, succeeding at it. And so like succeeding is something you've never failed at. For me, at least, I'm like, okay, like whatever. But when I fail at something and then I succeed, it's like rooting for a sports team. It's like me being a Falcon fan, right? So I'm an Atlanta Falcon fan. We have been miserable my entire life. I don't know why my parents decided to move me to Atlanta when I was in elementary school, but I'm stuck with them now. So what's going to happen? Like when they finally win, after all the failure, it's going to be the greatest day of my life. And so when I fail, I feel better when I succeed.
Listen, having grown up in Chicago, we did have the Bulls, but I grew up a Cubs fan. And let me tell you, I happened to be very lucky. I was there for Game 7 of the Cubs winning the first World Series in 100 and something years.
Yes, yes.
That feeling was freaking ecstasy.
I mean, literally had to have been.
Now I'm waiting for the Bears. But I guess maybe your Falcons will go first based on how we're doing.
Bears are looking good.
Yeah, it might be. Listen, in Chicago, we've learned a long time not to feel too confident.
I'm following it. Well, real quick, I'm falling in love with the Bears because they're this year's NFL's Hard Knock team, like on the HBO Hard Knocks show. So they're showing all the behind the scenes of the Bears training camp. So I'm like falling in love with all your people.
Because I was also way too young to remember the
84,
the 85 crew.
Yes, 85 crew
with McMahon and Walter Payton and whatnot. So, but I did watch it repeatedly on VHS back in the day, pre-Netflix. Somebody had a recording of it. So you entered worlds that 99% of us haven't been inside, the Amish world and the monk world. I'd like to go one by one there, like just the most interesting things you learned about each of those cultures.
Yeah, let's go. I mean, we'll start with the monks.
Yeah.
I think what was fascinating to me is that when I showed up with the monks and I'm like, why would these men live here and pray 6 times a day and eat at the same time and die here? Literally, there's a graveyard I used to hike up to, which is where they will all be buried.
Yeah.
Like, why would they? And what was so fascinating was it took about 7 days, but by day 8, I was like, man, if I didn't love my wife and my family, I think I could live here forever. There was something about the structure and the community that they had. There's a brotherhood with these monks that I'm like, wow, I think I get this part. I think I understand the brotherhood thing. These men are so committed to each other and to their vows that there's just something stable about it. We live in a society with barely any structure anymore, right? We live in a society that is like, it feels real wobbly all the time. There's just something so stable about these Benedictine monks that was beautiful, and I got it. I think I understood why some people would choose to do that.
Is part of it because it's so homogeneous? Like they've all, and one of the issues we have, especially in America versus even some other countries, is how diverse we are. Whereas you're in monk world, everyone is there for the same purpose. Yeah,
everyone's there for the same purpose. And I think so. I think there is something to that, to it being a little bit that way. I mean, there's a monk there who I think he was like 32, so he was one of the younger monks, and he was a professional skateboarder in LA before he became a monk. And so, just to talk to him and be like, why did you? Like, what? He's a good-looking guy. I'm like, why would you do that? He's like, I came up here and there was just something so drawing me to this place, to this land. And I knew that I would die here. These were going to be my brothers. So like, listen, I'm not there. That's why I'm not a monk. That's why like I'm hanging out with you right now.
Because as you just said, you like your family and your wife.
Yeah. And but I've become such good friends with Father Carlos. All your listeners, if they end up watching my documentary in October, you'll meet the monks, you'll see the monks. It'll be a really cool thing. And I'm excited for people to kind of get a glimpse into that. I think the Amish, this was what was really fascinating and surprising about the Amish. When I went from the monastery, 23 hours a day of silence, to Amishville, right, to Mount Hope, Ohio, and it felt like moving from a cave to Manhattan. Like the Amish go hard. I mean, it's mind blowing. Like 6 a.m. we're up on the farm and they're drinking coffee at 9 p.m. because meals lasted an hour and a half. Meals lasted 2 hours. Breakfast would last an hour. And they're just visiting and they're going and they're chatty. And it was a pretty big culture shock to go to the Amish. And so I think that's what was surprising is like the Amish, there's a lot of misunderstandings about the Amish and why they believe what they believe. Believe it or not, I don't see eye to eye with a lot of the Amish, way and a lot of things that they even believe. But I got to understand, Willis, who is my farmer friend. Mm-hmm. Tell me again, why don't you guys use cars? It doesn't make sense. You're using e-bikes now. So like the Amish have progressed to e-bikes and they're using e-bikes way more than horse and buggies these days. And so I'm like, well, you're using e-bikes. So like you're cheating. And he's like, no, Carlos, like we're not cheating. Let me tell you why and how we make decisions as the Amish. Whenever a new technology comes, the question we ask ourselves as the Amish is this technology going to take us closer together or tear us farther apart? And so we as a church make a decision as a local church. Yes, we're allowed to use e-bikes, or yes, we're allowed to use TVs, whatever it may be. They're not to the TV point yet. He would tell me, no, they still don't do radio either. Okay. But they do e-bikes, and some of them have flip phones. So if you own a business and you're part of this particular Amish ward, then you can, if you own a business, you can have a flip phone. And this is what Willis told me. He goes, if we had cars, and last week, Miss Betty's barn burned down. Guess what? We built her barn back up in 2 days. 2 days, the barn came back up. If we had cars and I was in Cleveland and the other farmer was farther away, it would have taken us a month to get Miss Betty's barn back up. So every decision we make about technology is either going to bring us closer together or farther apart. That's how we base our decisions. So here's the deal. Like they used to be all horses. Well, now some churches are allowing tractors. Why? Well, because the farms that are just using horses are actually having to close down because they can no longer keep up and make enough money for the farm. So again, Amish are not anti-technology. They're just going to be the slowest to adapt.
So I didn't realize, and is that the rationale for all Amish? Is like they basically the internet? Like, how do we feel about it?
Yep. So there's some Amish on the internet. Like they just there's different orders of Amish, and so the Schwartz and Trubers are the lowest order, and they're going to be the ones that they're never going to advance in technology. They're where they are. But the rest of the orders, the biggest order, which is called the Old Order, they definitely just keep making decisions. They'll just be the last to adopt something. So
did you introduce any new technology to them? You're like, listen.
Oh, it's funny because they had no idea. They're like, well, my daughter says you're on Instagram, and which was kind of cool because like I was living with Willis and Kathy, who were the Amish, but their daughter Krista is Mennonite, so she has a car and she's got a smartphone, so she follows me on Instagram. So she'll tell them stuff that's happening with me on Instagram, and they're like, oh, we heard that this was happening, and so I'll contact her in order to contact them. Their son Timmy is also Mennonite. He's a drone pilot, so like they're and he's okay. Like Willis will let Timmy fly the drone over to find the sheep that he's lost in his pasture. And he's like, hey, Dad, the sheep are over there. And then Willis is like, yeah, this is great. So I'll have my son do that. So, yeah, so, they're constantly moving.
Wait, how does one go from, sorry, now I'm fascinated. How does one go from Amish to Mennonite? Do you marry into it? You convert to it? Like,
so you leave the Amish church. So every, every kid, they have different orders that do different ways, but as a kid, when you become an adult, you make the decision, am I going to stay Amish or am I going to leave the Amish? Now, a lot of them still love the Amish community. They still love their families. And so Mennonite is kind of like the next, it's the word liberal has been hijacked, but it's a more liberal version of what the Amish believe. And so they have access to more technology, but they're still very conservative, comparatively speaking, to the rest of us. And so, yeah, so once you leave the Amish, you're pretty much gone. But I thought, Amish shun each other and they never hear. And I'm sure that happens. But in the community I was at, there were so many families that got together every week. Some family members would drive in because they left the Amish church, but they're still a family. They still have meals together. They still want to do all these things together. So that was pretty cool.
And you let your son use the drone that you won't use to find the sheep.
There it is. There it is.
Are you, so how into farming are you now?
Listen, I feel like a professional sheep farmer now. Like if a sheep were to walk in my basement door right now, I could shear that thing in 15 minutes flat. Like I've got new life skills at 50 I never thought I would have. What was so funny is that, for a whole week that I was there, he was waiting for the grass or for the hay to dry so he could cut it and bale it. And so like by day 6, I'm like, bro, when are we going to, cut the hay? Like, I became like a grass hay expert, right? I'm feeling the hay every morning. I'm like, Willis, I think today's the day. And so like, I was definitely leveling up in my confidence of being a sheep farmer. But, if Willis were to ever go down, I definitely couldn't run that operation.
So you go through your withdrawal, with the monks. Yeah. Then you head to the Amish. Was there a revelation for you with the Amish in this whole tech-free experience that has like permanently changed your viewpoint on things? Yeah.
Again, with the Amish, well, I think that they are so, I think the word, we were talking about it earlier. We were talking about YouTube. Like they're so able to come up with solutions to fix things without looking it up. And that's something that I wanted to bring back to like my life. Like instead of looking something up right away, I want to be like Willis. My wife calls it Amish Carlos. Like I love Amish Carlos. When I just figure something out, she's like, oh, that's so sexy when you just figure that out, without like Googling it or whatever. And I don't know, there's just something, again, that awakens my brain, when I do something like that. The Amish were also who made me stop using MapQuest, or Maps. I MapQuest.
MapQuest. Now you're aging
myself.
Us.
Yeah.
Back in the day, we used to use MapQuest. Yes.
Aging myself. But like the Amish were, who did that. But then I think the biggest thing for the Amish that changed in my life was that I was blown away that every meal lasted over an hour and a half. And I started, when I got home, I was like, gosh, those meals were so great. Because here's the thing, Willis and I, we disagreed on a lot of stuff, and we would disagree on these things over meals. And so like, his political view, my political view, we disagreed, but we would disagree over the love of a shared meal. And then we would sit there for an hour and a half and we would agree, we disagree, but then the conversation would go somewhere else. And we weren't left with just this disagreement. There was much more to the relationship. So I came back and I researched 100 years ago, the average American meal lasted 90 minutes. 90 minutes. In 2023, the average American meal lasts 12 minutes. Wow. So what have we lost besides just sitting around a table? I think we've lost the art of communication. I think we've lost the art of disagreeing over something for a long period of time, as opposed to just fighting about something for 2 minutes and then taking off because we're so angry. No, like mealtime has allowed me to disagree, but still love and still be like in community. And so I've extended my meal times. Like every meal, I try to have it for at least 45 minutes, and so that was initially a little uncomfortable.
Dad, can I go?
Yes. I'm telling you, like 12 minutes in, my kids are done eating and I'm like, mealtime isn't eating. Mealtime is visiting. That's what the Amish would say all the time. We're going to visit now. We're done eating. We're going to visit now. I was like, let's visit. And initially it was, really uncomfortable for the kids. There were some awkward times of silence. And we started at like 20 minutes, then we went to 30, then we went to 40. But now I don't know, I feel like it's 1985 again. We sit around the table, we catch up with each other's days. No screens allowed at the table. So like mealtime was something that I didn't know was going to surprise me about the Amish, but I've really implemented back into my life.
I also feel like it's something cultural here. I mean, in America that, this is the case, 12-minute meals, you go to other parts of the world and they're having a long coffee with you, a long tea. I mean, I remember some of my meetings when I was, covering things in the Middle East. Yeah. And, and even there, it's like, where are you from? Where's your family from?
Yes.
Like, let me tell you where my family's from.
Yes.
Let me tell you like about the war, like basically at one point in our lives, like my family was trying to kill your family several generations ago, right? It's the Middle East. But then you get to the point where like, now you're talking about music, now you're talking about art, now you're talking about whatever. And, it threw me initially when visiting there, because I'm like, I'm here to book the interview with the Sheikh of Dubai, right?
Yeah.
And his spokesperson is like, let me tell you where I'm from. I'm from the West Bank. Where's your family from? And it became this whole, and you had to establish that. You had to establish where you're from, what you're doing there.
Yeah.
And taking that time to me seemed like initially as an American, this is very inefficient. Like, this is not the purpose of this meeting. But they're getting to know you on a human level. And there's something to that, whether it's with strangers or with family. And
there's something to the length. I'm telling you, none of that would have happened. Those conversations would have happened if it was 12 minutes, right? Yeah. There's something to extending the length. When this leans into my chapter on savoring, when I was in Italy, the first time I kind of realized that I don't savor things, we were on a road trip in Italy. And again, Italians love to eat for a long time. And we go to a gas station on a road trip. And so my wife was like, hey, can you go get me a coffee? And I was like, sweet. So I went inside, ordered an espresso, and I ordered it to go at the gas station. Yeah. And the lady looked at me like, what is to go? I don't understand what is to go. And then I looked down the little bar thing. Again, this is a gas station. People are driving by. And I don't know, there's 7 or 8 people that were just sitting there leaning against there, sipping it out of their ceramic mugs. And I thought, oh my gosh, if we don't have time to sip an espresso for 3 minutes out of a ceramic mug, what in the world are we doing? So like savoring is something that we don't do. And I think savoring is the thing that can also extend our mealtime. Yeah, you talk about anticipating moments, staying in the moment, and then celebrating the moment. This is, admittedly, I'll tell you, this is the problem I have. My wife brings it up to me all the time, that I even the victories, the achievements. Yeah. Like I am very, I don't know, I'm wired in a way where I'm like, I got to go to the next thing. I got to be stressed out about the next thing. Like, whatever I just did, like, how will I outdo that? How will I continue that? How will, you know, and it's a real problem. Yeah, it really is. The acceleration of everything has become an absolute problem. To what point, right? At what point is it going to be too fast for all of us? Because that point is coming and it will come. So I don't know when it's going to be. All right. So we brought this up earlier. Talk to me about the brain scans, Doc Amen. What, and I know that obviously you have a family history. You talked about your father and dementia in the book. Yeah. So you had concerns going into this. What did the pre-experiment brain scan reveal? What did the post experiment brain scan reveal? Pre-experiment brain scan. Again, I was actually terrified to have the brain scan because of my father's history of dementia. And I thought, what if I get this brain scan? And the doctor's like, bro, you got 5 years left. I was scared of that realization. And luckily, fortunately for me, he's like, I've seen a lot of dementia brains. You don't have one, but here's some ways that you can keep yourself from having one. And let's look at your brain. So he looks at my brain. He's got a SPECT scan. He kind of spin my brain in 3D. There was a large indentation on the front of my brain, and he points to that, and he goes, did you play competitive soccer growing up? And I was like, yes. And he goes, I see this in 99% of soccer players. Too many headers. The dent is in the exact same place, whereas a football player, you'll see dents in different places. But I always can tell when it's a soccer player. He goes, your brain is a consistency of Jell-O. So just think to yourself, if you keep hammering your brain against something, it's going to dent. And so he does that, and he's like, there's definitely room for improvement in your brain. It's a little lumpy. I did a cognitive memory score where he like flashed numbers in front of me, and I had to remember the numerals and the order, all those things. 7 weeks later, come back, get my brain rescanned. My cerebellum, he said, saw the most amount of healing. He's like, this is actually pretty impactful what I see here. And again, he's like, this wasn't a scientific experiment. You were the only data point. So who knows if it was the praying with the monks or farming the soil or not looking at your screen. Your cerebellum healed, but also my cognitive memory score went from the 50th percentile to the 99th percentile. That's the thing that kicked it into gear for me, that I was like, holy cow, like there's only 1% of people with better memory than me now. That's pretty mind blowing. So the brain scan, I thought maybe was just going to be a fun thing at the end. No, that has definitely showed me I'm going to continue on this journey of what I was doing.
Now you got to get another one and see
I know. No, totally.
How much damage going back to the screen has done, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So that would be interesting to do that again. Maybe I'll do that. I think that's a good idea.
And you got to bring the whole Amish family in, and then you got to bring all the monks in.
Get
so
all
we
the
get some real
scan.
data points here.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
It must be remembering those directions, remembering that you take a right and then a left.
Yes. There's studies done on taxi cab drivers that don't use GPS on their brains. I think I have that study in my book that showed that, again, their brains were firing in places that people that use GPS's brains aren't.
Carlos, I appreciate you doing this experiment so the rest of us didn't have to.
That's right. You don't have to go live with monks or the Amish. Just read my book.
Though listen, I think it seems like a pretty interesting experience for anyone looking to do something, plan their next summer vacation.
Absolutely.
I don't know how many guests they're taking, but I wish you good luck with the book.
Thank you, friend.
And I appreciate you spending time revealing some of these lessons. And I hope that, I will try to find ways in my life, even though I've hooked myself now into this deal here where I do 24/7 news, where I can try to take a respite. Because I even took a couple days off. By the way, it wasn't because I wanted to recently. I got sick and I was just like on my back in bed. And I didn't post for a couple days. And I was a happier person.
Absolutely. You were, it just happens, listen, it doesn't take a rocket scientist.
I think that was my body saying, Moshe, you got to stop.
Yes. Well, here's the thing. I ask people all the time, the last time that you had rage inside of you, that you were so angry, did it involve a screen? Was whatever that was coming off of that screen that you were consuming the thing that caused you to rage? And 99% of the time it is. So we do find ourselves a lot happier when we're on it less.
Thank you, sir. Good luck with the book.
This has been a blast. Thanks so much.